Okay, so onto the Modifications tab. What the Modifications tab, well, this top panel over here does is just provide us with additional modulation options. So in our main synth, for example, in the triple VCO section, we have an option here to do some tune mod, some shape mod. We have options to, modulate the filter cutoff using these two controls, and that's about it for this option. So wherever you have a case where, let's say, you wanted to modify something else, but there's no control in the main synth, there might be an option to do it here in the Modifications tab. So in this case, we have options for FM and cross-mod depth. So if you recall, FM and cross-mod are basically the same thing. They just got different names in different synths. So for example, in dual VCO, cross-mod is over here, and it sounds pretty much the same as FM, whereas the triple VCO has this FM over here. So let's say we wanted to modulate this amount. There's no option to do that here. We can come down to the Modifications tab and turn this knob, and we will get some modulation. But we need to use a modulation source. So let's just use LFO2 here, for example. And you'll notice as soon as we assign it to an LFO source and turn this knob, that little M appears, and that just means that it's being modulated. You can see it there. It just appears. It's not a button or anything, it's just an indication. Okay, so if we listen to that. So there you can hear the FM starting to modulate there. We can even control it with maybe envelope 1 to give it a bit more of an obvious control. Okay, and then we have noise and dual VCO mix. So on synths where there is some noise, we can modulate that. And on, if you go to like dual VCO over here, you'll see that on these ones you have an option for noise. So in this case you could modulate that noise. Okay. And then we go on to filter section. So filter has a resonance modifier, and we can just assign that if we want to let's try envelope 2. And then we have filter FM, which if you remember just gives us a nice bit of grit, so maybe that would be a good one to do for this bass. Yeah, that gives the beginning of the sound a bit more crunch. Okay, and then we also have feedback mod. We can hear how that sounds. I've already explained what feedback sounds like. Okay, so that's pretty much this panel over here explained. Next up we have this lower panel over here, and this we can use to basically change the existing modification sources or modulation sources. And I'll explain what I mean now. I think this can be a little bit of a confusing concept, but basically we can assign any of these to like LFOs or envelopes or something, and it will change the envelope. So let's focus on envelope 2 for now. So we've got envelope 2 here. I'm going to assign it to the pitch of, let's say, all of them. And now that's pitching down. We could then set invert to envelope 2. And that does nothing yet, but what we then need to do is go to this and change it to invert. So because we're assigning it invert, it's using an envelope 2 and inverting it. So now it's going from low to high. So invert does exactly that, it inverts the values. And then rectify will basically make any negative value a positive value. And this won't work on envelope 2 because envelope 2 only has positive values, so it won't change it. For this we would have to use something like an LFO. So let's use LFO 2 and just hear how that sounds initially. Okay, LFO 2 is currently on a saw down, so I'm going to change it to a sine wave. It's going to increase the rate. Okay, and I'm just going to increase the amount so it's more obvious. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to rectify LFO 2 and change this to rectify. So now we're only getting positive values. It's still got a sine wave, but it's essentially sitting above 0 values constantly. So the entire, if you imagine this as like our line, and the sine wave goes up and below that line, instead of doing that, it's now pushed it up so that it's starting over here, touching the line, and then going back up. Okay, and then quantize will basically take this small LFO, the smooth LFO shape, the sine wave, and basically break it up into steps and give us like a very jumpy kind of LFO. If we set that to LFO 2 and change this to quantize, now we get that jumping up and jumping between the steps. And it has this little dial over here which allows you to start to smooth those jumps out. Until eventually it almost seems like it's not being quantized anymore. Okay, and then we have lag, and lag will just basically smooth out any sudden jumps. So let's change this to lag, and we'll set this waveform to our sine wave. So set this first to LFO 2, and also we'll change this to our saw. Well, let's change it to a square, because the square has sudden jumps in volume. And we change this to LFO 2. So as you can hear over there, it's kind of jumping up and down. And then if we change this to lag, and then hit the note, you can hear it's kind of starting to bend the note instead of it jumping up and down. And the higher we turn this, the more of a bend we get. So it starts to smooth out that sharp square wave and make it a bit smoother. Okay, and then we get onto the multiply and add here. So what we can do here is we can multiply two modulation sources. So let's say LFO1 and LFO2, we can multiply them together, and then we can start to get like really interesting shapes. So let's try that. Let's multiply LFO1 and LFO2. Where is that? LFO2. And then we will set this to multiply. So now it's multiplying this triangle with this square and it's getting some weird shape. Let's try a square and a saw. So we can get some really weird shapes here. Let's try assigning that multiply to the filter cutoff and see how that sounds. Yeah, very, very cool. And then the add is just basically adding them together. So if we add a saw and a square, let's try that. LFO1 plus LFO2. And then we change this to add. Let me try another one. Let's try a saw down with a saw up. Start to increase the rate. Can get some pretty crazy results. So that's it for the modification tab. Pretty cool stuff. Definitely make use of it. You'll get some really interesting sounds. So on to the next one, which is going to be trimmers.